Hi there, I'm John Phillips, co-founder of Sezoo, and I thought I'd record a quick run through of a deck we've just produced, which is looking at what is the trusted exchange or TEX, what might it mean for Australia, why is that important? Now we're going to put this up on LinkedIn actually as a PDF set of pages as well, so you can actually go through it at your own pace and look at the content, but I'll kind of walk you through the deck as it stands. First of all, explain a disclaimer. Sezoo explainers give a simplified view of our understanding. They aim to inform and encourage discussion. They are not advice. If you want to know more or are interested in how these and other digital trust developments will impact your business and digital strategy, then reach out, since working that out with you is our business. The Sezoo text plane or a Platts plane text. On the 13th of August, 2024, just over 7 days ago now, as I record this, Bill Shorten, the Minister for NDIS and Government Services for Australia, announced TEX, this trusted exchange, at the National Press Club. So what do we know so far? Why does it seem different, and why might that be important? Now, I've got in the printed version, you'll see there are three kind of cut-through things. You can have the long version, which I'll walk you through now, the medium version, which will cut you straight to tell me about TEX, and the short version, which is just the last three slides, why TEX is important in our opinion. Bit of context for those of you who want the long version. Australia has three levels of government: federal, state, territory, and local government. TEX is a federal government initiative, and it's important to remember that. The federal government is responsible for national matters, things like the borders of Australia, currency and trade, immigration, citizenship, social security, Medicare, stuff like that. State and territory governments have jurisdiction over matters in their region. So that includes things like education, healthcare, law enforcement, and justice. So that there's a completely separate and sovereign legal system for each state and territory, for the state certainly. And they have a great deal of control over of the rights and duties and so on that citizens enjoy in their states. The local government, of which there are 537 of them, are within the state and territories, and they have kind of local matters, community responsibility, things like rubbish collection, local paths and roads, parks and recreation, libraries, and so on. Now, Australians, whether you want to or not, interact with all levels of government, of course, if you're living in Australia. And there are various sort of areas where government bodies have to interact with each other, where they have shared interests, so roads that cross borders, health, utilities, power supply, water, and so on. These are things that require coordination across these government levels of government. One important interaction from a sort of data and digital point of view is between the states and territories and the Commonwealth government, and it's the Data and Digital Ministers meeting. Happens every few months. There's a whole website devoted to the content. You can find all the ministerial sort of meeting minutes that are published after these meetings, and it's includes also, in fact, New Zealand as well in the mix as well. So it's a fairly broad brush collective, chaired by currently Katie Gallagher, chairs it from the Commonwealth Government. The 21st of June 2024 meeting, the minutes of that actually discussed in some detail, at least two paragraphs, modernising Australia's ID system. So they agreed as ministers collectively a digital ID and verifiable credentials strategy and common standards for verifiable credentials. That's very important. Now, this sets the scene. It's in the sort of second half of June, before the 13th of August presentation at the National Press Club. But it's quite interesting. You notice if you read the second paragraph, they're referring to the digital ID legislation, the digital ID bill, which passed through the Australian Parliament in May 2024, and sets the scene for a thing called AGDIS, the Australian Government Digital ID System, which you'll see at the very end of the second paragraph. Now, government agencies have developed online platforms and systems over many years, since the dawn of the internet and websites. Each developed over time their own sort of method of user authentication and access control. So you proved who you were and you did various things. You kind of registered with them, if you like, and provide certain points of detail about yourself. And now you've got an account and access, and you can do things with tax or with healthcare or with other parts of federal government, and similarly for state and similarly for local council. The complexity of dealing with government isn't just, of course, the digital differences, if you like, between ways you access and so on. There's actually a whole bunch of things to do with government that are important, and they include whether there are gaps in services or whether there are overlaps in services, whether there's sort of nugatory friction, if you like, in gaining access to the right services. And so over many years, I'm sure globally, there have been many transformation services, transformation initiatives by government to try and make government simpler, to try and make access easier, to reduce friction and to provide sort of easier access to services, and to do things like tell me once as an initiative where you don't have to keep telling each individual government agency that you've moved, for example. In 2013, this is sort of part of that sort of style of initiative, the federal government of Australia announced or launched MyGov. So MyGov is the front door for digital services and supports individuals to access the services of participating government agencies. So that's the kind of origin, if you like, for MyGov. It's quite a few years ago. It's more than 10 years ago as I speak to you now. MyGov now allows you to link, I think it's about 15 services. And there's a list of these here. Most of these are the federal government agencies that are linked to MyGov. But you'll notice I've highlighted a couple that are actually from the state of Victoria, which is interesting that there are actually some degree of access to sort of state-based services as well. In terms of sort of design pattern, MyGov acts as a hub and the agencies act as spokes. There are similar initiatives at state, territory, and sometimes local government levels. So you've got MyGov, say, at the federal level. You've got things like Services New South Wales and Services Victoria providing their own capability for citizens to gain access through to a single point of access to government services. To link services, MyGov needs to match a customer record in an account previously established by the customer. Now, what happens when you create a MyGov account? Anybody can create a MyGov account, more or less, and then you request to link services. And when you request to link services, what MyGov is trying to do is to link what you've told MyGov about yourself with what those other agencies know about you. And sometimes when there are overlaps or inconsistencies, maybe your middle name or middle names weren't all transcribed, or maybe they became an initial or something. Those things can cause hiccups in the way things are linked, but also, unfortunately, meant that if you knew enough about somebody, you might be able to sort of gain access to the linked services having created a MyGov entity. And that particular issue was unfortunately taken. Abuse was made of it by fraudsters, and a few issues occurred. And there was an ombudsman report recently about sort of where MyGov could tighten up its access, and they're working on that. They're going to improve that. But text is like a whole new approach to this whole problem of linking and gain access to services. Now, for MyGov to work as it does, it had to create an exchange to connect linked agency accounts. And now, alongside the development of MyGov, there's work on a thing called Trusted Digital Identity Framework, which is a precursor to AGDIS. And the MyGov exchange is one of the listed entities, accredited entities in the TDIF environment since 2019. To get to this level, of course, required a significant investment, both to build and then to continue the operations of the MyGov exchange. Let's talk a bit about TEX. The 13th of August speech describes a whole new use pattern with TEX. So the National Press Club speech and government media release of the 13th of August describes TEX as giving Australians the ability to verify their identity and credentials, and that users will be able to work via the digital wallets of their choice. So our assumption, it seems reasonable to us at least, is that TEX will make use of existing investments and infrastructure to the extent that it is able. So it seems very likely that the Trusted Exchange will make use of the existing infrastructure created for MyGov, including perhaps the exchange, but in a new way. So TEX uses verifiable credentials and digital wallets as part of the ministerial announcement. These are elements of decentralized systems. So what? In general, a decentralized system is one where the issuer, a trusted authority or agency, issues credentials to a wallet held by a person or sometimes an organization that allows that person then to represent these credentials to whom they choose later, when they choose, to the level of detail they want to share with them, and so on. So this idea is that you gain the rights to hold credentials, you prove various things, you get a credential, and now you can use this credential whenever you choose to use it. So you have control over the use of the credentials. And the other thing that's important about the generalized model for a decentralized sort of trust is that when you prove something to a verifier, an organization that is providing a product or service you want to gain access to, you don't have to include or involve the issuer. That generally that there should be a way for you to prove something to the verifier and then they will give you access to protocol service, and the issuer doesn't need to know you're doing it, and that's a very important sort of privacy issue. Now, text will enable government agencies to issue verifiable credentials to digital wallets. So what about these wallets? So the MyGov app will be one such wallet, but the government media release describes users working with the digital wallets of their choice. So we should expect more than one wallet to choose from. And in fact, there should likely be some degree of alignment and rationalization. There's an existing body of work that's been done by the Australian Tax Office, who've got MyGov ID, another one of the TDIF accredited entities. It's going to be called My ID in the very near future. And that'll be no doubt part of the story of how TEX works with all the other government initiatives that are carrying on. Government credentials can be presented as proof of rights and capabilities back to government agencies. And that may sound like a bit of a why would you kind of use case, but there's actually some very important benefits of doing it in this way. One is that the process of onboarding and proving stuff is in a sense necessarily rigorous. You've got to do a whole bunch of things to get to the level of confidence that the agency has. Yes, you have the right to this recognition, to this thing. But having done that, you now want to be able to prove you've got that thing without having to go through the whole process of proof again. You don't want to have to go through all the justifications, if you like. Now, if you can do this, let's take a simple example. Imagine that you have the right to a concession ticket for travel on public transport. Now, when you buy your ticket, in exchange with the barrier, which is like acting like a verifier, is I have the right to a concession. They go, okay, here's the price, and you get a ticket. Now, all that the ticket inspector needs to know is you've got a valid ticket. They don't need to know why you got a concession, right? There's no need for you to pre-prove, if you like, why you are eligible for a concession. You just have a valid ticket. That's all they need to know. The other things you can do are you can selectively disclose contents of the verifiable credentials you hold. You don't need to show all of them. You can show just some of them. And the other thing is a thing called zero knowledge proof, which is super, super cool. And it lets you prove that you have a thing, a capability or a right, but you don't need to say anything more about it than that. You can extend it to the thinking about things like digital driving licenses. Maybe that I can prove I have a valid driving license, but I don't need to tell you more than that. But that's not why TEX is so interesting for Australian businesses and people. TEX is important because it offers government-issued credentials being used in non-government transactions. So in the ministerial announcements, there are examples of relying parties given in the minister's media release. A relying party is like a verifier in that model I showed you earlier. So these include finance companies, pubs and clubs, phone companies, property rental, job platforms, favorite checks like, are you over 18? These things. Now, those things have been the preserve of existing kind of commercial efforts and to actually provide some degree of proof and some other things that other companies have been doing. So now we're being able to use government credentials to prove these things kind of directly. And that's really exciting for people like us. We've been talking about this for a long time. You'll still get to see this in a second. But it also begs questions like what happens to the KYC type processes that banks have to follow? Are they able to rely directly on government credentials, in which case things like reusable KYC become a bit of an oxymoron because you can just go straight to the source documents, and why do you rely on a third party to give you a KYC that they did? So now we've been promoting the idea of decentralized trust models and verifiable credentials since 2017. We've long seen credentials from the government as foundational to digital trust systems. What do I mean by that? Things like birth certificates are so much more important than a credential from some other party, because a birth certificate is a recognition by the state that they owe this person the support and safety and provisions that they provide citizens of the state. It is a phenomenally important thing, and it has legal weight and consequence, whereas most digital ID systems don't have any of that. They don't have any kind of recognition of what it means to have the thing, whereas things like the foundational documents that we get from government tend to. We believe that these sort of credentials can be used to radically improve trust in digital interactions for the benefit of all. In fact, that's our mission statement. So we are, in principle, very excited by TEX. But there are details to discover, though. So these details we've kind of broadly could describe along three main dimensions: technology, how will it work, and the details behind that; governance, how is it going to be managed and regulated and transparent provisions and so on, and the commercial details. Well, these will define basically how trustworthy the T of the trusted exchange is and how successful it is for the Australian sort of socio-economic system. 6 type of questions that we've got. Of course, there's a question around how does it align with existing initiatives, Digital ID Bill and AGDIS? What about the states and territories and the Austroads National Digital Driving Licence Initiative? These are ongoing as of the speech of the 13th of August. States and territories have been investing in digital ID and credentials for years now. How will they approach the Fed techs? How will they enable access to their state and territory services, interoperability and standards? What about the legislative and regulatory governance framework they've already established? How does that kind of cooperate? What is the government revenue and commercial model for the use of tax-issued credentials? So how will costs and revenues be apportioned across departments within the government? But what does it also mean for commercial initiatives, such as the TDIF accredited entities of Connect ID, Ratify ID, MasterCard ID, AusPost Digital ID, ID Kit, and others? How will governance in broad senses work? How transparent will it be? Will it be obvious that there are reasons why we should be we can give trust to the system? What about the federal government agencies, users, and verifying parties? What about risks, guarantees, and liabilities? What does it mean in terms of liability if you are providing the proof of some government credential using potentially the MyGov wallet to a verifying party? What kind of guarantees are there? What kind of liabilities are there? How will some of the classic tensions be resolved between customer privacy and support? Things like credential revocation, wallet choice, non-repudiation, call home patterns. These are all key to trustworthiness in a decentralized system. How will techs help prevent fraud and scams? Will there be trust registries which list the approved verifying parties, trustworthy verifiers? Will they give you lists of valid requests so you can know that this is a company that is recognized by the government and they're asking you a question that is considered a valid question to be asked, given what you want to access as a product or service? These sort of things, and there will be more than these 6, are the very gist of what will make the proof, if you like, of techs being a trustworthy exchange. So we generally hope it will be, and we're very excited by the initiative. We hope to be involved in it, and we understand that it's going to cause a lot of very, hopefully, interested conversations across many companies in Australia, and we'll be very happy to be part of those. Hope you enjoyed this explainer.